Welcome, everyone. Thank you all
Yeah,
so much for being here.
yeah,
My name is Choi-Hae Rivera. I'm an assistant professor in English in the College of Arts and Sciences, and welcome to Invisible No More, Asian American Responses to Atlanta. So the killing in Atlanta of 8 people last week, most of whom Asian American women living on the fringes in the service sector by white male gunmen, reflects a wake-up call to the entire country about the recent escalation of anti-Asian violence since the rise of COVID-19. The incident was traumatizing to Asian Americans throughout the country. Many of us have felt hurt, scared, othered, furious, gaslit, confused, numb. The range of expressions which we have felt and have met this crisis with has been vast, but the need for community has never been greater as a consequence. Which is why the 5 of us who are on this panel decided last week to convene across multiple schools at BU to host one of the very first Asian American faculty panels in recent memory to address not only this recent escalation of anti-Asian violence, but to think about what we can do as a community at BU to move forward and to establish stronger support for Asian Americans and people of color in general on campus at the student, staff, and faculty levels alike. For too long, particularly at places like BU, many of us have felt that our issues have been invisible or dismissed. Over the past week, I've heard testimonies across multiple levels. Asian American staff members still being seen as perpetual foreigners in their own departments. My students getting harassed and called anti-Asian epithets on the streets of Boston. White faculty members dismissing the killings in Atlanta as secondary to the rise of a creeping Chinese geopolitical threat. For many, Boston University has been a hostile place for the Asian American community. And the speakers are here today to draw connections between what happened in Atlanta last week to what we experience in Boston, sometimes every day. The rise of anti-Asian violence, while currently in the spotlight, is also not necessarily anything new. The very settler colonial project of the colonization of the Americas was predicated upon the orientalization of its indigenous inhabitants as Indian, after all. This university is on occupied land that belongs rightfully to the Massachusetts and Wampanoag tribes, people deemed Indian, dispossessed. The killings in Atlanta are attached to a long history of imperialist exploitation and violence against Asian women in particular. These aspects will be addressed by our panelists today. Thank you all so much for being here. We'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Anna Howard Shaw Center, the School of Theology, the School of Social Work, the College of Fine Arts, Faculty and Staff Assistance Office, Diversity and Inclusion Office, the African American Studies Program, the Department of English, and the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Program. Thank you to Alana Anderson for providing additional publicity support, and to the Office of Disability Services for their support in providing disability accommodations for tonight's event. A special shout out to Sabine and Travis for being our ASL interpreters, as well as Janice, who is doing the captioning. We are very grateful for all 3 of them. I also want to provide a shout out to Ronald Richardson and the Center for the Study of Asia for their town hall that just concluded, that they put on separately from us, and we're so excited to have complementary events, and we're all together in this struggle in solidarity. So before we begin, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an outline for how the rest of this is going to go. A few ground rules. We ask that for the time being in the beginning, that you keep your cameras off and yourselves muted until we go through the whole panel. We will then open to discussion after our last panelist. We will be recording the first half of this event with a faculty panel. As you can see here, it says recording. But we will not record the Q&A and discussion afterward. That way you can feel free to be uncensored and honest. During that discussion, we ask that you be respectful of one another and you know that all feelings are valid. I will also say that the marginalization of other groups is absolutely prohibited. That means this event has zero tolerance for anti-Blackness, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia, among other forms of discrimination. And I will reiterate this before the discussion begins. And now, I will introduce our panelists, and I will introduce all of them right now. Dr. Choi-Hae, Dr. Yoon Ha, Dr. Hyuk Chris Hahm, and Dr. Kin Vu, and I will read each of their bios before they each speak. We will begin with Dr. Kin Vu. Dr. Kin Vu is an assistant professor of music at Boston University, where he teaches music education and performance courses in general music, instrumental music, history, and philosophy. Focusing his teaching, learning, and research model on global citizenship and intercultural literacy, his first co-edited book with Andre de Quadros, My Body Was Left on the Street, Music Education and Displacement, was published in the summer of 2020. Congratulations. Kin serves as a faculty in residence at Boston University's Kilachand Hall and coordinates the Writers Corridor Specialty Housing in collaboration with Kilachand Honors College and Residence Life. Please give a warm digital applause to Dr. Kin Vu.
Greetings. Very excited to be here tonight. Thank you so much. My talk tonight is a little bit more theoretical, I suppose, but it's about voice. And I think that's something that all of us could use a little more of, is voice. Let me get this out of the way. I'm an adoptee. My voice was stolen and I want it back. Growing up was a funny sort of thing. I was gangly, awkward, very awkward, and so afraid of my own shadow. The ability to blend in with my surroundings was a desirable and necessary characteristic, a sort of superpower for someone like me, an adoptee. I performed my part the best I could, yellow-skinned boy living amidst a sea of whiteness. While it is true that I was jaundiced upon arrival in the United States, I wonder if, as the jaundice subsided, that my Asianness subsided too. In most of my presentations to the Greater Boston University community, I have given an account of my abandonment, adoption, and subsequent struggles of being an Asian American. The issue I want to play with here is how I think I may have performed my body and its voice, assets that were left on the street at the end of the American War in Vietnam. Because I am a music professor, I think it is best that I begin with a short discussion that emanates from music, specifically musicology. I learned the word performativity during a class called Music, Gender, and Sexuality. The focus largely was on women and the historic roles they played in shaping the music industry. From Clara Schumann in the 19th century to Madonna in the 20th, these notable women broke stereotypes, such as the place of women in society. Ruth Soley, for example, examined the place of girls and their pianos within early American pioneer households in her article aptly titled "Girling at the Parlor Piano." Susan McClary challenged critics' notions about pop star Madonna, whose music and whose body must have seemed like an insurrection on the hallowed halls, red traditions, of Euro-American male musical practices. What is relevant to tonight's discussion is how women musicians, girls at the parlor pianos, and Madonna rolling on the floor in a wedding dress, perform themselves into reality by adhering to a particular set of patterns, repeatable dialogues, and actions that act to reify and calcify societal norms inscribed onto the body. The events of the past several weeks, Asian elder abuse and the shooting in Atlanta, remind me of that musicology course. According to Jonathan Javier Inda, the word performative first appeared in writings by J.L. Austin in 1975. In 1988, Derrida took up the term and developed it further, while Judith Butler's 1993 work, Bodies That Matter, and subsequent popular gender studies text, Gender Trouble, launched the term performative into a collective, albeit academic, consciousness. Inda, in 2000, joined this lineage by using performative to describe race, stating that race does not refer to a pre-constituted natural body. Race is a social fiction. What Inda theorizes in very layman terms is that race is socially constructed, that white bodies and brown bodies, while both human, are not equal in form, stature, rank, and hierarchy. A setting apart of races in America, say in the late 1800s, was predicated on the fact of biology, of physical traits that could be easily classified and ordered into binaries, ones and zeros, whites and non-whites. What does this have to do with adoption? In very new research for me, I am studying how adoption is a form of migration, or more specifically, quiet migration. A particular form of involuntary displacement, quiet migrations are largely unaccounted for, due in part to myriad causes associated with abandonment and subsequent adoption, such as birth out of wedlock, famine, or war. Anthropologists and demographers have been keen to dissect adoption terms like push and pull factors and the effects sending and receiving nations have on children. Music, however, has not taken a critical viewpoint of this subject, or any viewpoint at all. Rather, the field, especially music education, has created a subterfuge they've branded multicultural music education. But that's a subject for another talk. So, relating adoption to music ed, where voice takes on a particularly specialized meaning, i.e. the singing voice, and I see my colleague Sharon Daniels here, I love her, fabulous. I have been thinking about who stole my voice, how it occurred, and why I want it back. I'm looking into connections linking birth culture with birth voice, adoptive voice, and reclaimed voice. More research is needed on my part to flesh out the particulars, but for now, I consider the birth voice as one associated with home culture, in my case, Vietnam. How one acquires an adoptive voice is trickier to describe because it, like the birth voice, is learned. But what is learned, especially in the case of international or cross-border adoption, is an entire dialogical and material culture. For adopted babies, the transmorphic experience could be mistakenly viewed as a simple process of nurturing the body, mind, and soul into the performance of being, into being something other than the birth voice, body, and so forth. The reclaimed voice is not at all simple, particularly if the adopted person was not raised to know their birth culture. How can the grown body come to know a voice that it may not have embodied at birth? Does that voice lie in hibernation or in a sort of coma, waiting for a moment to awaken? One's voice specifically is a part of an overall performance of self. Think of how many times you've heard someone's voice, looked at their body, and come to some judgment about that person's life. What then might it mean when I begin to use my voice musically or otherwise, not only to perform myself into being, but in the process claim a position of power in which I imbue this new voice with a cause? It is a purposeful and perhaps violent decolonization of the adopted voice, performing it into a being that becomes my voice of birth, my voice of consciousness, my voice of struggle, and ultimately a voice of visibility. In short, I think that Asian American, and Pacific Islander voices must continuously counter social fictions about race materiality, like slanted eyes, and perform themselves into being. The repetition of performing my Asianness by kicking social fictions in the figurative gut is key. As an adoptee, I've had to work hard to break out of the privilege of whiteness, leverage it with two-eyed seeing, and learn to speak and sing in a Vietnamese American voice. The performative me is in constant flux, an intersubjective and intersectional body that struggles to be Asian enough, to be American enough, a body that continuously suffers the conundrum of having one hand in the past and one in the present. Let our voices be heard. We must not be silent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vu. Very powerful message for all of us. Next up, we are going to hear from Dr. Chris Hahm from the School of Social Work. She is the first Asian American who was promoted to full professor at the BU School of Social Work. Through her groundbreaking research, she is dedicated to reducing health disparities among Asian American populations, with a particular emphasis on building empirical evidence of health risk behaviors. Funded by NIMH grants, she has developed and tested theoretical frameworks that explain suicide behaviors among Asian American women. The culturally grounded interventions she has developed include AWARE, which is an acronym for Asian American Women's Actions in Resilience and Empowerment, and Youth Aware, which have been implemented in colleges and high schools. She has also received the Research Mentor Award at Boston University and the Innovators Award from Asian Women for Health. Many of her accomplishments are reflected through her authorship of more than 60 peer-reviewed journal publications and 200 professional talks locally, nationally, and internationally. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Hahm.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Thank you. It's so good to see you, everybody. The title of my presentation is "We All Have the Power to Change the World." Today I came here not to teach you anything, but I wanted to tell you the stories. I came to America as an international student in 1992. Before I came to America, I was so anxious to come here because I have nobody. Like, I have no family members here. I have no really close friend. I really didn't know anybody. So before I came to America a couple of days ago, I went to the library. I grabbed a book. The title of the book was "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway." I love the title so much. I don't even think that I read the book. I checked it out today. It was sold 2 million copies by today. Right now, I'm feeling the fear. Right now, you are feeling fear. We all have fear of rejection. We all have fear of ridicule. We all have fear of violence. We have fear of being murdered. But we have to feel the fear and do it anyway. What are we going to do? I'm going to ask you. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell you 2 stories. So last Wednesday, I gave a mental health workshop to BU undergraduate students. I was supposed to do that. It wasn't in response to Atlanta shooting. I was scheduled to do that. So I met about 30 undergraduate students. There were Vietnamese Student Association and Korean Students Association. So Atlanta shooting occurred one day before, right? And we start off talking about the event. And one of the students said, I came from Atlanta, and as a Korean, person in Atlanta, we are coming from very tight network, and this kind of shooting is destroying our community. And I'm very scared of my parents, and I'm very scared of my grandparents. They were all in fear, and they didn't know what to do. So I said this: We all have the power to change the world. What can we do? You know what? Why don't we donate $20 to AAPI Stop Hate? Why don't you make groups, start forming a therapy group? And I know that it is very important to think about your Vietnamese association, Korean association, but you know what we need to do? We need to have a Pan-Asian association, and we need to develop our collective power, okay, to develop our political power within BU, political power within our nation. That needs to be done. Once I said that, all the students, their faces were empowered. They're sparkling with hope and energy that they can do something. That's one story. Another story. I belong to very small Bible group from my Korean church that I attend, that our family attend. So it's located in Cambridge. So we meet once a week. And one day, which was right after Atlanta shooting, 4 women got together. Most of the women are very educated. Actually, 3 of us have PhDs. However, because most of them have very little young children, they are staying home mostly, and they have a part-time job. So these women, we all talked about, the harassment and discrimination and shunned, experiences that we have been experiencing ever since COVID-19. So, of course, they didn't know what to do. And I said, 2 of the women have PhD in music. So I came up with ideas. I said, you know what? You are the musician. Why don't we start having a healing concert? Okay? And then once I said healing concert, their brains started working. And then all of them got so excited, and we decided to create a YouTube video for 5 minutes to 6 minutes, and it's going to be dedication for those people who died. And we decided that their deaths are not going to be in vain. We are going to celebrate their lives. We are going to make our pain known, and we are going to talk about our actions through the music, but in a very peaceful way. And once we start thinking about that, everybody became so excited and so focused on the project that we have, and we're going to get it done by next week, because timing is the key. So I'm going to ask you questions. Thank you so much for coming here, because the fact that you came here, you're already taking an action. And the fact that you're here, you're going to meet a lot of people. The fact that you're here is that we are going to change the world, because we have power to change this world. And I'm going to read you my statement. We all have the power to change the world. We have tolerated so much, and we have suffered alone. It's because we do not want to burden others or make troubles. We suffered alone because our voices are often dismissed. We can no longer afford to be silent. We can no longer afford to be invisible. We call to action for dignity and the right to be safe. We must rise together in peace and harmony, because we all have the power to stand in solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thank you so much, Dr. Hahm. And that's a very powerful message, especially in terms of being able to unite politically, unite as a single force. I will say that among the students, there is a pan-ethnic Asian American organization called the Asian Student Union that's been doing a lot of really great work on campus as well. So I want to give them a shout out, and hopefully they'll be able to speak more to their efforts at the end of this presentation as well. Next up, our third panelist is Dr. Yoon Ha. Dr. Ha is an associate professor at Boston University School of Social Work. Using an equity lens, Dr. Ha's research focuses on identifying gaps in social policies and programs that hinder eligible children and families from accessing safety net resources designed to fight poverty. She is an expert on policy analysis and program evaluation and has an extensive experience working with state and federal administrators on the issues of early child care and education, child welfare, and child support. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Ha.
Hi, everybody. I have a PowerPoint slide, so let me share my screen first. So can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. So as you might guess from the introduction, so I'm not an expert on any Asian specific studies. I'm a poverty and policy researcher, and I work a lot with data. And then I also work a lot with state and federal administrators. So today, so what I wanna talk about is about data. So Dr. Hahm talked about political power, right? So to have political power, to support, to back political power, I believe that we have to have data. So so just for disclosure before I move on for this topic, this is not my own data set. So this is the kind of data I put together to kind of talk about data disaggregation, and then just kind of give you guys thoughts about how we can approach this topic. So what is data disaggregation? So the data disaggregation is the process that divides the data into detailed subcategories. So disaggregated data is often broken down into categories such as gender, reason, as you can see here, ethnicity, race and ethnicity. So disaggregated data can reveal inequities between different subgroups, subcategories that aggregated data cannot. So this is a busy table, but I will walk through. So then why it matters for African American and Pacific Islander. So there are more than 17 million members of nearly 50 different races and ethnicities are categorized into a single group. So we call the Asian American and Pacific Islander. But we need to understand Asian American and Pacific Islanders in the United States are very diverse, and so too are their socioeconomic experiences. So when it comes to economic success in the United States, Asian American and Pacific Islanders are often pointed as exemplary achievers. So you all probably heard about model minority. So, however, as you can see in the first table on your left side, so Asian overall ranks as the highest income groups in the United States, but it's not a status shared by all Asians. So therefore, this narrative that all the members of Asians are relatively homogeneous and successful puts many a vulnerable subset of Asian communities at substantial risk of being underserved by their local, state, and federal government. So for example, when you look at the left side, Hmong Americans, for example, are less likely than the average American to have a household income over $50,000, be employed, or be a college graduate. But the livelihood of these families, which originally from Southeast Asia and mostly migrated into the United States at the end of Vietnam War, get lost in aggregated data provided by local, state, federal agencies. So aggregated data for all Asian American and Pacific Islanders socioeconomic indicators, such as income, educational attainment, employment, helps to preserve these ethnic-based inequities among many subgroups in this catch-all AAPI categories. So then you can argue that, what about other racial groups? So the Hispanic population is diverse, the Black population is diverse and white population is diverse too. Yes, I totally agree, but their socioeconomic experience are not as much diverse as Asians. So we all know that income inequity has been on the rise over the five decades, meaning that higher income adults in the United States experienced more of an increase in their income than low income adults within all racial and ethnic groups. So however, when you look at this by each racial group, the disparity is most pronounced among Asians. So Asians in the top 10% of income distribution on almost 11 times as much as Asians at the bottom 10% of income distribution. So that's gonna, the graph in the left side show that. But when you look at the table on the right side, you will see the income of Asians at the top 10% nearly doubled over the 5 decades. But Asians at the bottom 10% increased only 11%. So which is a lot smaller than groups for lower income Black population, white population, and Hispanic population. So inequity among Asians increased overall as those at the top and middle of the income ladder pulled away from those at the middle and middle compared to high, and then middle compared to bottom. But the lower income Asians lagged behind. So I want to actually bring this data into our home here in Boston area. So this graph shows neighborhood index, opportunity index. This is kind of the data we often use in the policy discussion. So in this graph, the neighborhood were categorized based on we called opportunity index, child opportunity index. That means that so this index ranks neighborhood based on 29 neighborhood level indicators, such as quality school, park, and playground, or whether it has clean air or access to healthy food, healthcare, or safe housing. So these are some of the conditions or resources that children need to grow up healthy and to become, like a productive adult. But as you can see here, when you just look at the Boston metropolitan area, and then 2 Asian American groups, so here I chose Taiwanese and Hmong, you can see the stark differences in terms of where these 2 ethnic groups live. So many Taiwanese children live in the neighborhood we describe as a high opportunity, but two-thirds of Hmong Americans live in low opportunity neighborhood with few or none of these conditions. So why it is important to talk about this, especially in our state, Massachusetts, because our state does not disaggregate data on Asian population. The implication is significant. So when we talked, our Asian American population, Asian American and Pacific Islander population is extremely diverse and does represent different life experience, health, and educational needs. So the state needs better data on our residents so that we may accurately allocate our limited resources to the people who need them the most. And we live in data-driven society, so you can't make public policy without data. If you don't have data, you can't advocate. So it's not that we didn't try. We in Massachusetts, we tried, and then we called tax bill. So in Massachusetts, we filed tax bill in the House in 2018, but it kind of dropped off. And then it was filed again, and it's currently on the legislature right now. So the bill would require all state and local agencies to break down data collected about Asian American and Pacific Islanders into 5 largest ethnic groups among Asians, so Chinese, Indian, Filipino, Vietnamese, and Korean. However, there's a huge backlash to this data bill. Actually, it's from our own Asian American communities, so accusing it as a racism bill. So they didn't want this bill to pass for the fear of racial profiling and the potential worries about, what if it has negative effect on, college education and all those, which in my opinion, seems to a little bit unfounded. So, so I think we must understand the Asian American and Pacific Islander is a kind of some sort of like umbrella term for groups that increasingly have different needs. If Asian American wants to reap the benefit of this pan-ethnic identity, we need to consider that data disaggregation will allow for more resources and support for support to reach groups that need it. So in an open letter in support of the previous bill, Janelle Wong and her co-author stated that, quote, I have this quote here. Yeah. So to reject the collection of high quality detailed data on AAPI is to reject the representation of all members of our growing community. This quote unquote. So, so disaggregating data is not a racist proposal, but it will confound the structural inequities exist and they give lawmakers and community organizations a chance to address issues faced by this invisible segment of Asian American population. So, so this is about the data aggregation. And then when Atlanta shooting happened, so personally, I couldn't sleep for a few days because this was, as a poverty and policy researcher, this is a most fascinating issue. And then this was structural issue. And then my head was spinning to just deconstruct the event. And then, so here, what I'm thinking is that, when we talk about, low wage jobs or minimum wage, we are not talking about other groups. We are talking about Asian. And when we talk about immigration, refugee related issues, we are also talking about Asian. And then when people worry about growing growing income inequality, we are really talking about Asian groups. So we must confront this. We shouldn't let our community invisible, and we should advocate. And then I completely agree that we should have political power. To do that, we should have data. And then we should be, finally, we should be on the table when people make the policy decisions. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ha. And I just want to say that this is an extremely important issue here in Massachusetts. As Dr. Ha said, this has been a contentious issue for Asian Americans here. There's been a long-standing battle on both sides of this. I personally am in complete agreement with Dr. Ha that if we are serious about equity, we have to push for data disaggregation for Asian Americans, despite the fact that there are very powerful Asian American forces that oppose it for, mostly on the grounds of college admissions, which is sort of interesting. I think what's also really important about Dr. Ha's presentation is that she's drawing attention to the ways in which the Asian American community is so heterogeneous, that it contains people who are oftentimes written off and not necessarily centered in the narrative of what it means to be Asian. And these are also the types of folks, the often excluded and often abjected people who were killed in Atlanta. Folks that we oftentimes don't think of at the forefront of what it means to be Asian American. We also think it's important for us to remember that the term Asian American, when it was first developed by Yuji Ichioka in 1968, was a term that was explicitly anti-racist, that was a form of pan-ethnic solidarity in order to combat the types of white supremacist violence that was being inflicted across all communities of color. So the data disaggregation movement would be in the same spirit as the very pan-ethnic formation that Asian American was from the beginning. So I just wanted to sort of add that in support of Dr. Ha's presentation. All right, so thank you so much, Dr. Ha. Our final panelist, I'll stop editorializing. Our final panelist is Dr. Choi-Hae. Choi-Hae, sorry about that. Dr. Choi-Hae is a clinical associate professor of practical theology. And Dr. Choi is also the one who initially conceptualized this panel. So we need to give her credit for that. I also want to give quick shout out credit, because I forgot earlier, to Morgan Lehofer, who is providing so much background tech information. I mean, background tech support as well. So shout out to Morgan Lehofer, and back to Dr. Choi. Dr. Choi is a clinical associate professor of practical theology. Her research and teaching focuses on practical theology, gender and cultural studies, leadership, and post-colonial studies. She was one of the first her most recent book, A Post-Colonial Leadership, Asian Immigration, Christian Leadership and Its Challenges, explores how Asian immigrant leaders exercise leadership and confront challenges in the United States, and expects another new book, A Post-Colonial Relationship, Challenges of Asian Immigrants as the third other this year. Thank you so much for being our final panelist, Dr. Choi, and please give Dr. Choi a warm round of applause.
Thank you. My today's talk, the title is Invisible Between White and Black and Native Alien Binaries. About 15 years ago, 4 white men on the Commonwealth Avenue yelled at me, "Yellowstone head, go back to China," and gave me the derogatory finger gesture. As I became aware of the situation, my body was shaken, and I started to feel unbearable, strong rage inside. Now, 15 years later, I still hear the same words and recently experienced a similar incident like this again on the street. Nothing has changed. Rather, it got worse. Even though I'm not a Chinese person, many people's looks tell me to go back to China and leave this country. When I heard about the Atlanta shooting, these memories all came back to me. I especially felt this when this shooting was not recognized as anti-Asian violence, but as a crazy white man's personal problem. I said no more. Even though 3,800 anti-Asian violence cases have been reported during the pandemic, and in 2021 alone, 503 cases occurred already. Still, this society makes Asian Americans, immigrants invisible and pretends that our voices are not heard. Why? Why are Asian Americans, immigrants invisible in this society? I spent the last 15 years seeking the answer to this question. Today, I want to share one of the answers that I found with you. That is, the positionality of Asian Americans, immigrants between white and black, and native alien binary paradigms. I discussed this topic more deeply in my forthcoming book, A Post-Colonial Relationship, Challenges of Asian Immigrants as the Third Other. I started this book with 2 questions. The first question is, why was the white and black binary structure invented? As the other racial ethnic groups demand socio-economic restoration, a white-centered paradigm minimizes its responsibility by focusing on only one ethnic group, Blacks. Struggling to protect white colonial and post-colonial privileges, the black and white racial binary divide is often sugar-coated as either supporting Black people's rights or demonstrating white people's admirable effort for the Black people's movement. By forming these discussions as the race problem, Black and white relations are presented as relations of the all races. Asian Americans' issues of inequality became invisible. The second question is then, what then about the native alien binary structure? In the beginning of the US immigrant history, Asian immigrants were not allowed to have US citizenship. The legacy of this policy continues to impact us. As this anti-immigrant policy plays in relation to nativism, Asian Americans immigrants are still seen as permanent foreigners who need to leave this country. Adding in the minority model myths, they are perceived as dangerous foreigners who take the upper middle class position from the white middle class and steal opportunities from the white lower class and the other racial groups. Lifting the hardship of Blacks as citizens of the US who deserve proper rights within the white-Black binary, these paradigms coerce Asian Americans, immigrants, to take the blame for the suffering of Blacks, as it carefully locates Blacks in an oppositional position from other racial groups. It perpetuates a vicious circle of competition between Blacks and Asian American immigrants. At the same time, emphasizing immigrant issue as a Latinx issue, these paradigms put Asian Americans immigrants in another vicious circle of competition between Latinx and Asian Americans immigrant groups. Of course, this is not the only factors to make Asian Americans immigrant invisible. Many other external and internal factors are intertwined, and I have named few significant points here in this slide. Positioned in between these two dominant paradigms, Asian American immigrants are often criticized as pseudo-whites and betrayers in the eyes of non-white groups, and as a threat to the white post-colonial structure and privileges. From this systematically unjust environment, we are often evaluated as people with a lack of self-confidence, problematic communication skills, and hierarchical leadership styles. Does it mean we are caught in these paradigms and so everyone should pity us? No, I am also very aware that despite these odds, Asian Americans, immigrants have shown their amazing strengths and solidarity beyond their ethnic circles. I have seen more and more of our Asian communities and allies stand in solidarity together with not only victims of anti-Asian violence, but also stand together in the Black Lives Matter, LGBTIQ issues, immigrant issues, and other social justice issues. We have worked very hard to transform this liminal position into being a mediator of this society. Our global transnational sensitivity and awareness are more important than ever. I believe our hybridity and diversity genuinely make this society better and more beautiful and abundant. So, yes, invisible no more. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Choi. This has been such a wonderful panel. Very soon, we are going to set up some breakout rooms so that we can begin to chat amongst each other. So here's how this is going to work. So first, I am going to actually stop recording so that we can speak comfortably.